Good morning. Come on, guys, you can do better. There you go. There you go. Thank you. Well, it's customary for university presidents to start with a joke. Not necessarily a good joke, but a joke nevertheless. So up until this last year, before I became president, I only had to deal with food scientists and nutritionists and agricultural scientists and maybe biochemists and engineers. This is the first time I had to deal with much broader audience, so to speak. I had to deal with artists and humanities people and so on and so forth. So you all know the joke, how many ... does it take to change a light bulb, right? Some of you maybe. So I'm visiting our sociology department, and I hear the version from the sociologist that says, well, how many sociologists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is 1, but the light bulb must want to change. I thought it was funny too, until I went to visit our philosophy department. And I told this joke to them and says, well, you haven't heard ours, have you? I'm like, no, I haven't. Well, how many philosophers does it take to change a light bulb? I'm like, I have no idea. He says, ha, that's not the right question. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, let's see. So back in 2017, I was asked to do a little bit of work for the National Academy of Science, and now it's Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So, you know, all of that is put together. Foolishly, I said yes, because, you know, I was getting to the point of my career as Dean of Agriculture that I felt I know the job well enough. I can probably take on another little thing. But I don't know how many of you have worked with a lot of National Academy members, putting them all together in the same room and trying to get them to agree on things, but I did not know that. Now I do. It hasn't been a very easy task, but nevertheless, about 1.5 years later, we do have a report. And I'm going to start by briefly talking about the premises of the report before we get to the results. And a couple of things in terms of support that are important. Obviously, we had the support of 2 nonprofit organizations, 2 foundations, the Supporters of Agricultural Research and the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. Those were the 2 most important players here. And also we had support from NIFA, USDA, NSF, and the Department of Energy. And I do want you to notice that NIH is absent. And again, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. You can find that report in the National Academy's website. It's an extensive report. You'll find a lot more information into that I will cover today. Here's a quick look at the committee who was part of that. Several Academy members, many public university academics, some private universities, and we had 1 individual from industry, the Robin Luge from IBM. She was an exceptional data analytics scientist from IBM, and she has really done a good job of helping the committee. So let me start by why did we do this work? When the Academy, the staff from the Academy came to me and they asked, you know, would you like to help us do this? I asked the question, why do we want to do this? Why is this important? Well, many of you know why, and I'm listing a few things here. Our food and agricultural system faces a lot of challenges today, more than we faced yesterday and probably as many as we're going to face tomorrow. It's about time we took a look at how do we resolve that from a scientific perspective. And it's not just because the population continues to increase. It's not because the middle class in China has become now bigger than the U.S. population. It's not just climate change. It's not all the different things that you see. It's a lot of things put together that they have put tremendous pressure on agriculture and our food system. So that's basically the reason why the Academy decided to do that. What was the committee asked to do? And the next couple of slides are important because I want to put the premise as to why we came up with the recommendations that we did. So we were asked to define challenges, particularly the greatest challenges to the food and agricultural system, the opportunities, but scientific opportunities. We're only talking science. Knowledge gaps between the opportunity and the challenge, and what sort of research do we need to do to really close those gaps. In other words, we were asked to come up with a few scientific breakthroughs and provide some recommendations to the Academy as to how we move forward to close those gaps. How did we do it? Well, we had a lot of public meetings. We asked a lot of people to come and talk and give us their peace of mind, their expertise. Roughly about 60 different speakers from 60 different areas came to be part of the public meetings. We started those in June of 2017, and we had our last one in November of that year. And then we also had a lot of web conversations, webinars. We had a lot of other conversations through social media. We had about 80 different submitted comments from a lot of different people. And we also conducted specific webinars for things that we didn't really know very well. We didn't have expertise within the committee. For example, we had a webinar on food science. We had a couple of food scientists on the committee, myself and somebody else, but we didn't have expertise, for example, in, whatever, let's say food flavors. So we had webinars on a lot of different areas. At the end, we put all of that together and together with a lot of information that the staff really helped put together. We had a lot of information to review. We did have some boundaries and some constraints that we had to adhere to. The biggest one was the time frame. We really needed to come up with breakthroughs and recommendations just for the last 10 years or so. I mean, the next 10 years, I'm sorry. So anything we came up with needed to really be applied and have an impact by 2030. So we're not looking at 20, 30, or 50 years time frame. We're looking at 10 to 12 years time frame. And that was very important because we dropped a lot of recommendations that otherwise would have made the top. Again, we're only looking at science. We're not looking at behavioral sciences. We're not looking at social sciences. We're not looking at a lot of other things. This is hard science. And we're looking to identify breakthroughs and make some recommendations. The other part that is important here is the fact that within our scope and outside of the scope, and as you see there, we were giving the charge to really look at the U.S. food and agricultural system. The committee pushed back to that, but we were brought back and we were basically told that you will look at the U.S. system, not the global system. Now, we did do that, but at the same time, all of us understood that there isn't such a thing as a U.S. food and agricultural system without huge connections to the global system. So obviously whatever we came up with has global implications. There's no questions about it. We decided not to venture into human nutrition and the impact of food to human health, primarily because, number one, we didn't have the expertise within the committee, and number two, we didn't have the time and the money to cover all of those different areas. And that brings me back to the fact that NIH was not a sponsor. So NIH felt, in my mind, that at the time, maybe food is not as important to human health as some of us may think it is. So no real discussions about human nutrition, and if you see a few other things, biofuels, distribution, access, policy. We didn't really cover a lot of policy-related issues. So with that in mind, let's move into some of the findings and what we talked about. One really major goal that we wanted to accomplish is whatever we came up with in terms of recommendations, we wanted that to really improve efficiency, resiliency, and sustainability of that system. And we can argue about what the meaning of these words are, and we have definitions of these words. We discussed it to death. The bottom line is those are three key words that I asked all the committee members to keep in mind as we were moving forward with our discussions and deliberations. So improve efficiency, improve resiliency, and improve sustainability of our food and agricultural system. So some of the most challenging issues that we talked about or we discussed, I'm putting up there some of the things that are, this should have come up altogether, but it's apparently not. Anyway, the bottom line is that the last one that you see there is reducing food loss and waste. We've heard a lot of conversation about that today. But it was one of the things that we looked at very, very extensively. It's a very challenging issue. It's one of the issues we need to resolve. Some of the other ones that you see there, nutrient efficiency, and we're talking about plant nutrients now, extremely important to agriculture. Soil loss, it takes hundreds of years to create or recreate soil, so it's extremely important that we maintain and not lose our soils and not degrade our soils. Genetics, we have to figure out a way to mobilize our genetic diversity for improving crops as well as animals, as you see in a minute. Water, huge issue within agriculture. We're very inefficient in using water to grow plants and to grow animals. So that was another one of the challenges that we looked at. Animal genetics, extremely important. Where, again, we can improve efficiency of growing animals quite a bit if we actually did a lot of things well. One of the things that we discussed, it was precision livestock production systems and what that means and how those can be improved. Early and rapid detection of diseases, and that goes to plant diseases as well as animal diseases, and of course, foodborne pathogens, early detection of all of those. Many of our scientists from the agricultural side, the plant side, the animal side, or food microbiologists are basically saying very similar things. You know, one of my former plant pathologists, for example, kept telling me that, John, we're just one major plant disease away from starvation, and people don't understand it. And it's very true. We can say the same thing about animal diseases. We're one major animal disease away from starvation. If you look at the report, it's really organized in a sort of a traditional way. We have a crops chapter, we have an animal chapter, we have a food chapter, but we also have soils, water, data science, and a systems approach. Those are the major parts of the report. But what I wanted to do today is just give you the 5 major breakthroughs and recommendations that really span all of those areas overall. That you can say the same thing about plants and food and animals and so on and so forth. So what are the 5 major breakthroughs? Number 1, transdisciplinary research and systems approach. Number 2, sensors and sensing technology, data science and informatics, genomics and precision breeding, and the final one is the microbiome. So let's look at each one of them separately. Number 1, transdisciplinary science and systems approach. We can't really solve any major challenges, any major problems without bringing a lot of different scientists, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different questions together. So we have to really approach things in a much more comprehensive way than we have done in the past. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to really address those 3 major things we talked about before, to improve the efficiency, the resiliency, and the sustainability of that system. So our recommendation was to really create transdisciplinary science and systems approaches that will be funded by major agencies and prioritize those approaches to really solve, those major issues within food and agriculture. The one last point I want to say about that is, if we actually did do that, if we converged a lot of different disciplines together, it will help us not only address the challenges, but really will help us ask the right questions. This goes back to the philosophy that I told you about before. That's not the right question. It will help us ask the right questions. The second thing that we felt very strongly about, it was sensors. Sensors and sensing technologies. We already have a lot of sensors that we could utilize that we're not. And also, there's a tremendous promise to create new sensing technologies that could completely revolutionize the food and agricultural system. What are we talking about? We're talking about precise, accurate, and field-deployable sensors. We're talking about biosensors as well as other sensors that will enable early detection, fast detection, monitoring capabilities across the whole system. So we're suggesting that we actually create an initiative to really study sensors and sensing technologies and move that forward over the next 10 years. We believe that's very, very doable. Data science and informatics. The application of data science, software tools, systems, modeling, all sorts of things. We really have a lot of tools in our disposal today that would just, even 5 or 10 years ago, didn't even exist. So let's utilize those tools to really understand the complexity of the system better and try to address and answer some of the questions that we were talking about before. The next one is genomics and precision breeding. Obviously, we all understand the complexity of this issue, and particularly, if you deal with food and nutrition, you also know the resistance or consumer resistance to GMOs and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, right now, genetics and genomics is another tool in our scientific toolbox, and if we don't use that to really capture the ability we have to improve plants, to improve animals, to improve microbes in many respects, and to utilize that tool in order to improve efficiency, resiliency, and sustainability of our system, we're not doing anybody any favors. As a matter of fact, the committee believed it's extremely important that we figure out ways to counter a lot of the misinformation and a lot of the public mistrust out there, although we didn't go into details as to how to do that. Nevertheless, genomics, we believe, is an extremely important and valuable tool to utilize for plants, for animals, for food, for microbes, and so on and so forth. Microbiome. Now, I know most of you probably, when you hear the word microbiome, you're thinking about human microbiome. That's not necessarily the only thing we're talking about here. It is that, but it's also the microbiome that exists all around us, all throughout the environment. The interaction of microbes with plant roots, for example. The interaction of microbes in the soil with the plant itself. The interaction of the plant microbiome with the animal microbiome, and on and on and on, all the way into an integrated, very complex system of microbiota across the food and agricultural system, including humans and the human microbiome. Again, there is evidence to suggest that over the next 10 years, we could actually, if we study the microbiome well and intensively, we could make some very, very important contributions to moving the food and agricultural system forward. Now, those were the 5 major breakthroughs that the committee brought forward, but we had a whole slew of other things that we wanted to talk, and we separated only 4 of those as additional conclusions, if you like. And here are the 4 additional conclusions. Research infrastructure, funding for research, education and scientific workforce, and socioeconomic and other considerations. And I'm going to briefly talk about each one of those. But those are things, again, that cross a lot of the different areas that we try to cover. Plants, animals, food, water, you name it. So what are we talking about here? Well, those of you that are researchers and scientists and work in academic institutions or in government labs or in industry for that matter, you probably know that our facilities have really deteriorated. APLU, the Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities, did a study the last couple of years specifically for facilities. And they found that across the country, this is the U.S., we are roughly behind more than $1 billion worth of just repairs for facilities. Most of our research facilities in food and agriculture are falling apart. If we don't do something about replacing those facilities over the next 10 years, we will not be the leaders in food and agricultural research anymore. So this was one of the issues that the committee felt very strongly about. And together with facilities, of course, you know, we're talking about equipment, we're talking about a lot of capital that needs to go into cutting-edge research. We did manage to put a note in there about land-grant institutions, particularly about agricultural experiment stations. We believe that system is extremely important, has really driven a lot of changes within the U.S. Food and agricultural system, and we would like to continue to support that system as we move forward. However, funding for food and agriculture has declined significantly over the years, and that's both in the private as well as in the public sector. And again, this is something that we believe needs to change. Education and scientific workforce. A few years back, this was 2014 or 15 rather, there was a study that was published by Purdue University and USDA that basically projected forward for the next 5 years how many jobs we will need in the total sector, food and agriculture, within the U.S. And I believe the number was roughly about 66,000. Well, if you take all the universities that we have in this country and you put it all together and you see how many of those jobs we can fill with agricultural scientists and food scientists and all the similar professions, it will be about 35,000. So we roughly cover about 60% of the need, and this is between 2015 and 2020. The need will only increase as we move forward. So it's imperative that we figure out ways to really attract more people into food and agricultural professions. We train more students, particularly as the baby boomers are moving out of academia and out of their jobs. And the final one that I wanted to mention there is really a better understanding of the hard sciences, the biophysical sciences, the life sciences, and the socioeconomic sciences, and how we can bring those two together, including human behavioral sciences for that matter. How do we bring those together so that the whole system benefits from that collaboration? So, with that, I think I covered most of what I wanted to say in good time, so we have a few minutes for questions. So I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, John. So I would ask anyone with questions, please come to the microphone and please identify who you are first. We're open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Rosen from the Monal Chemical Sciences Center. One of the best talks I've heard in a really long time. I applaud you for the work. Just tremendous work. Thank you. Thank you. Could you speak a little bit more about a couple of things? One, sort of the process going forward for where this information is going and how to start actually transferring the recommendations into implementation steps. And also, I'm particularly interested in the sensor aspect, and if you have ideas or thoughts about how to sort of move that forward specifically. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the comment and for the question. There's a lot of different approaches as how to move forward. And number one, the Academy itself is promoting this report as good as they can. Next week, for example, I'm back in D.C. working with one of those sponsor groups. I think it's the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, to really figure out, you know, specific steps as to how we move forward. But let me just give you some quick comments about that. The idea was that many of those breakthroughs, recommendations, suggestions will find their way into a lot of different things. For example, the Farm Bill. I was in D.C. Testifying in front of the Ag Committee, the Senate Ag Committee, about 6 months ago. So some of the ideas were supposed to go into the Farm Bill. Some of those actually did make it into the Farm Bill, so we'll see how much of that can be appropriated and how much of that can actually move forward. The other idea was that USDA, NSF, hopefully NIH, and some other government agencies will actually take that report and shape their funding priorities so that they can start funding some of those areas, sensors being one of them. So our suggestion is if a funding agency or two or three can come together, they can put significant amounts of money invested in any one of those areas so that academics, private labs, others can actually respond to those calls and figure out some ways to really make progress.
Alison Kretzer, ILSI North America. Great talk. I just wanted to share with you for ILSI North America, it's great. It helps identify areas for us. And if we pursue an area, then we always anchor it back to the report. If somebody says, why are you doing this work? It's always very, very helpful. My question to you is whether or not typically with Academy reports, they don't track like how various different people do follow up on recommendations and start working on, closing the research gaps. Is there any plan to kind of track that, just like what you just shared, the different agencies? Because again, that's extremely valuable.
Yes, I think that the answer to that is yes. The Academy truly plans to follow up, and they have a group of staff members that are very dedicated to agriculture and food, and they will continue to work down this path with this report. As I said, I think it's not this coming week, is after the week after that. I'm back in D.C. really trying to figure out implementation steps for some of the recommendations in the report. But the two not-for-profit organizations, the Supporters of Ag Research, the SOAR as they call themselves, and the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, those two foundations have taken that upon themselves to continue the move forward and figure out how to implement it. And I'm glad to hear that ILSI would be supporting some of the recommendations as well. The one thing I wanted to say is, and this is, I've been a food scientist for almost 40 years now, and I've worked very closely with a lot of food scientists and nutritionists, just like many of you. The one thing that I was telling the chair the other day, the one thing that I figured out as Dean of Agriculture for the last 6 years, and now as president of a university, is the opportunity for us to work with a lot of other scientists, a lot of other experts. It doesn't have to be a scientist. It's huge. Many people have interest in food. Many people have an interest in agriculture, but most people don't have the knowledge to make the right decision. And the final thing I wanted to say to that is, I think agriculture and food have been disconnected for quite some time. We need to bring those back together.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. My name is Joe Samaca, and I'm with Cargill. And I want to thank you for the wonderful presentation, and in particular, I want to thank you for your leadership to the food industry at large, and also with the IFT and other organizations. But my question for you is, and with all due respect, why was the food industry not more fully represented in the selection of the committee members? I'm struggling to understand why there was a single private industry company, IBM, and given the fact that the largest part of the infrastructure is owned by the private industry and has to be the organization at large that is going to implement a large part of the recommendations, why weren't they at the table?
And I asked the same question of the Academy, and the answer is that we want to avoid any kind of bias. We want to avoid any kind of, the industries behind this. We want to avoid being coined as a report that supports special interests. And that's why really the majority was there were academics, many of them members of the Academy. So I didn't make that decision. If it was up to me, I would have included several people from industry, because I've worked with industry all my life. I still, consult with industry. And I know the depth of expertise and the ability that exists in the private sector. But that was the Academy's position, and they're doing very similar things across the board. This is not just food.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, John, wonderful report. Ricky Yada, University of British Columbia. I think we'll do a word search and replace. Everything you said around the United States is probably similar in Canada. One of the things, John, that is a challenge for us on the transdisciplinary aspect is that the reward system in academia doesn't promote that, right? It's always still very much an individual reward system. And so we need to change that up, because we've seen a proliferation of programs through the various agencies to foster multidisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. But our young researchers are going, why should I get involved? Because it's going to be a challenge for me when I come up to promotion and tenure.
Yeah. Ricky, thank you. And actually, I was talking to somebody yesterday about that. And the question was, so do we need to do away with departments? Do we need to do away with colleges? Or, And I said, no, I don't think that's the case. I understand the difficulty. Of course, we all face that difficulty. However, there is a very, not easy, but very secure way to get there. When I was department head in food science at Penn State, for example, we put a lot of multidisciplinary teams together, from people from, my department as well as other departments. And it's not just nutrition, right? I mean, you can say those two are fairly close. No, we work with a lot of different people, all the way to medical doctors and all the way to agricultural scientists, to behavioral scientists, to you name it. As dean, I had, many interdisciplinary teams that put together. But you have to really try hard. You have to lead that. And the other thing we need to do within academics, within academic institutions, is to really shift our P&T. We can't expect our young people to produce things on their own and then turn around and tell them now collaborate with people and not give them credit for that. So a little bit of mentoring and a little bit of change in our P&T procedures, I think, can go a long way.
Hi, John. Thanks very much. This is Kerdow from Cargill, and that was a wonderful presentation and a wonderful and really compelling vision for the food and agricultural system for the future. Very exciting, so thank you. Question I wanted to ask is, notwithstanding the absence of industry in the formulation of this report, the areas that you've identified as these breakthrough areas are absolutely compelling to us in the food and agricultural industry. They are currently absolute priority areas of investment for companies like ours and for the whole commercial agriculture food system. So given that we also recognize those as priorities, has there been discussion, and is it part of the ongoing plan going forward to create public-private partnerships to address these critical areas? And in the future, are you discussing mechanisms and how to make that happen? And I think this is a great forum to raise that question, given the whole structure of ILSI as this tripartite organization to bring these multidisciplinary groups together. So that's my question.
Yeah. Carrie, you put your finger in you're asking the right question. And I think organizations like ILSI have a tremendous opportunity to step up and do exactly that. Right now, the National Academy, that's not their role. They're not going to step up and do that. However, FFR, it is a partly government, partly private supported foundation to pretty much do exactly what you're suggesting. So, you know, this is who I will be talking to, you know, a week from now or so, and that's what they're planning to do. Now, my suggestion would be that this organization, because I know ILSI for a long time now, I may not have been coming to meetings and I may haven't been participating very actively, but I know this organization well, and I have great respect for you know, what this organization has done in the past. I think ILSI can take a lead into exactly that, creating public-private partnerships and moving a lot of those things forward. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mark Moorman with the Kella Company. Really enjoyed your presentation, and certainly thank you for the report. One of the areas you identified is in the space of genome editing, gene editing. And looking at this from the food industry, I'm trying to get a better sense for what kind of traits are going to be coming at us. You had mentioned, I think, work within the microbiome of the plants, as well as looking specifically at the opportunity for new traits. Can you talk a little bit about what the committee was seeing? It's hard to keep track of everything that's coming at us, and I'd like to get a better feel for what the committee saw. Thank you.
So, Mark, let me see if I understood the question correctly. What you're asking is, what is it, when it comes to genetics and genomics, what sort of activities will influence food in the future? Is that?
Yeah, so I guess the introduction of GMOs was an abysmal disaster for food industry on a lot of levels. And certainly we lost the consumers in this space. And as I look at the gene editing technology and it's how it's applied to agriculture, my head is trying to understand, what does this look like as new plants are developed, right, new traits, et cetera? That's what I'm looking to better understand.
So I'll try to answer that question. There's no question that, you know, genetically modified organisms have had a negative impact to the public in terms of, you know, food and everything else we expect. And the recent activity in Europe about gene editing and as a technology, it's also very negative and not very welcoming. However, what the committee felt is that, you know, we're a group of scientists, and we know that we have scientific tools in our disposal to make things better for people. And by better, we mean we can actually create disease-resistant crops. We can create disease-resistant animals. We can create crops that have better nutrition. We can create crops that can grow in drought conditions. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do to move forward to improve the efficiency, the resiliency, and the sustainability of the food system. If we don't use that tool, we're not going to be able to accomplish certain things over the next 10 to 15 years. That was really the major point we were trying to make. We understand the negativity of the public. The committee, as a committee of scientists, not behavioral scientists, you know, we don't claim to understand that, but as a group of scientists, we think that eventually the public will turn around. The misinformation will get to the point where it will harm the public, and the public will start to see through.
Thank you.
One final quick.
Chuck Sprinsky, University of Wisconsin. Enjoyed your talk. I'll speak quickly. Coming up back to the comment about getting faculty involved, I think the promotion system has improved, that you can do collaborative research within limits. But an issue is how you fund that. And I'll pick on USDA and NEFA as an example because they're not here to defend themselves. But they've had some programs with, you know, global expectations. You throw a chunk of change out there, but by the time you get all the people involved, there's very little money left for the end users to do anything productive. So you have global grand ideas, but the funding mechanism is not really flexible and in a good position to help people accomplish anything. So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind if you really want to make progress on this with federal funding of some of these initiatives.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, the amount of money NIFA distributes is a minuscule amount compared to what NSF or NIH gives out. So that was one of the comments that we made towards funding, and particularly funding as it pertains to food and agricultural research. We understand that NSF, NIH, and some of the other agencies put a lot of money into basic research. Some of that basic research underlies food and agriculture or supports it, but we're really talking about increasing funding for food and agriculture. And one of the reasons NIH was not part of it is because they didn't want to put any investments towards food and agriculture. NSF is much more open to that, and my hope is that collaborating with USDA and NIFA, maybe we will see some different things going forward.
So please join me in thanking our keynote speaker, John Floros.